Welcome to today's conversation on enhancing the opportunities in the graduate experience. And today's discussion is the third of 5 based upon socialization research about the troubles that graduate students may encounter in school, in graduate school. Today's topic is independence. We'll start with a couple of quotes. Maya Angelou reminds us that independence is a heavy draft. If you drink it in your youth, it can have the same effect on the brain as young wine does. It does not matter that its taste is not always appealing. It is addictive, and with each drink you want more. So here you are in graduate school. You've had a prior experience to add up to some independence, and you get into this place that you are hoping for more. Deborah Tannen reminds us that communication is a continual balancing act, juggling the conflicting needs for intimacy and independence. To survive in the world, we have to act in concert with others, but to survive as ourselves, rather than simply as cogs in a wheel, we have to act alone. So therein lies the fact that independence is a tension between doing what we want, saying what we want, thinking what we want, and working with others, our field, our academic environment, etc. So today's agenda includes a discussion of how bad is it, how did independence tap out in our survey of challenges. What independence is it that you want? How can it be earned? And what kind of takeaways do we expect from this conversation? So we have ongoing a survey of graduate students and their faculty advisors about these 5 traits, which are challenges, which are shown by research to cause disengagement. And on the left-hand side, you see what students thought, how important these things were in causing them to consider disengaging. And then on the right-hand side, you see the representative of the same question, but how the faculty thought. So there's quite a similarity on the independence, although the faculty think it's a bigger problem than students think it is. Either way, it came under less than 1 in 4, or about 1 in 4, and so it's not one of the heavy hitters like support or work-life balance, but still worthy of note. So let's see what research says. These are the qualitative evidence from the same survey. 4 things kind of tease themselves out to me as being related to independence, and the first one mentions it directly. I'm happy for the independence, but would benefit from at least some outreach from my advisor. Feedback is very slow, and this is disheartening. When my discouragement causes me to become disengaged, I would really like my advisor to simply email me and check in. That has never happened. And I've been working on my dissertation for 3 or 4 years. I don't like to count. I know that the responsibility falls to me, but someone to show a little bit of investment or care would go a long way. And therein lies this fact that we aren't in it alone. We're in a group. And how much it's our choice to engage or disengage with the group, but also we would like them to be engaged with us. Having a committee that is has a different view of how they want to see things written, and being stuck in a loop as each member wants things written from their own perspective. And so that's a case of lack of independence. Perhaps both on the committee's part and on the students' part, and we'll discuss the ways that might occur later. Dropout didn't come until the dissertation phase, and what is different between the dissertation phase or thesis phase and the rest of a structured PhD, and that's the fact that you're doing it alone. So independence is something that causes people to confront themselves or confront their situations differently than they do when they're in a group, and that may cause its own challenges. The process is flawed because at the end of the day, we are students within a mega learning curve. In addition to having clear goals, advisors said one thing to me and then changed it when the group weighed in. And we'll see that a little later too, about the fact that there is a context that has impact here. There is the context between you, your advisors, and the context of your advisor and their peer group. So in the course of a viva or dissertation or proposal defense, the group mind supersedes anyone's individual mind, yours or your advisor's. So this begins to tease out what turned out to be a very interesting and substantive conversation, if one that is perhaps a bit vague to talk about. So something that isn't vague is the fact that if you are an international student, you may have more difficulty with this concept than if you are not. And I'm quoting some research here, but it just goes to show that the 40,000 international students in the U.S. Will have a different scale from their background about what's right and proper as approach to their advisors. The United States may have a sense of students being very independent that would not be the norm from other countries. These different standards as to the role of teacher versus student therefore can cause the expectation to be independent and able to defend one's ideas and work may cause extreme discomfort in some cases with some ethnic groups. So it is, as we've said this in some of our other topics, context determines a lot of how we see our experience. So the more that we understand our context, the more we can parcel out what's our view, what's the view that's being sort of put on us because of our previous environment, and then what do we want to do. Adrian says that in graduate school, we are learning to become independent in conducting research, but with guidance from the advisor, which hopefully gets more offhanded as we grow. Wonderful timing for what I think is this next slide. Oh, one more thing about context first. And in a previous conversation, one of the students recommended that we lead from these conversations with exercises. So there's 2 exercises written into this one. And the first exercise is to inquire as to your advisor's experience as a student or in academia. How much independence is required or expected, because their experience will have impact on your amount of support that will be given. And you'll notice from the PhD comic here that there is a perception before you get into graduate school and academia that you're going to be able to research what you want to. And then there are constraints on what you want to or the amount of independence you're given everywhere along the way. It's not just you as graduate students, but it would be you if you became professors, even tenured professors, and professors emeritus as well have some, challenge put on them. Hopefully, along that path, you get into a place where you're doing exactly the kind of work you want to be doing, and then you are, in fact, given intellectual freedoms. But so context is important, and you might just decide to ask your advisor, what was their experience like? When I was talking in Africa, I was explaining to the graduate students I was talking to that their professors had it very different than they do. It used to be, in the African context, that there was very little conversation, and so you would turn in a thesis, and then one professor told me of his advisor literally taking his, then in those days, typed theses, hard copy, one hard copy, tearing it up and putting it in the rubbish can, and that's what he considered comment. So this idea of intellectual freedom, independence, and what is support also go hand in hand. So what independence do you want? Well, when we look at research, we find that several things are mentioned. First is role development and identity. So part of independence is develop the role or the identity that you want, and it's a prerequisite. Taking on that role identity is a prerequisite to acting independently. So involvement is required in a role and in preparation for it. In other words, as graduate students, you're moving from you as student to you as independent whatever, academic, person in your field, doctor in your field, researcher. Put your word, your role development word in there, and then what's required for you to take that on in an independent fashion is a bit of work. In other words, successful graduate students are not passive in their engagement, yet this development is interwoven with support issues. And they go on to say the degree of autonomy given by the faculty and the amount of independence exhibited by the graduate student are critical for the faculty-student relationship. Now, we're going to see some other authors comment on that. So independence also has importance in engagement. And these Finnish authors discuss the fact that contribution, 11% linked with engagement. So the fact, if you are somewhat independent and growing in your role, and as you grow in confidence in independence, you become more competent. And this competence is your contribution to your field, and that links with your growing engagement and more independence. These experiences added to engagement equals autonomy and linked to the source of engagement for long-term work in your field. So that caused me to say, well, what is independence and how do some fields measure it? And I found that healthcare has very precise measurements for independence. And they do so because they're treating people who have been in serious situations, and they have a 18-phase measure for independence. 5 of the attributes are cognitive independence, and 13 of the attributes are criteria for movement and physical independence. And I thought that those 2 measures were probably pretty appropriate here as well. Cognitive independence would be, if it is a tug of war, shall we say, with an individual situation between each student and their faculty advisor as to how much a sense of independence they have or will be given, because you might have noticed that the relationships are different. So even with one advisor, different students will have different experiences. So what are the attributes that help an advisor be able to give more independence to their students and vice versa? Well, so cognitive independence comes with an obvious ability on the part of the student for critical thinking. You bring in interesting, unusual, provocative ideas, and you state them well, and you can back them up with their citations from other people, and yet it's clear that you have thought independently, you have sorted the literature, found new options, and you have flexibility in your mind for both the conceptual and the empirical, you will be given much more likely to be given cognitive independence as you proceed through your thesis. Same kind of thing for the ability to actually act on your own. Now, some schools have guidelines on how much action is available at what stages, and they've developed those in their way and means to help students not find themselves in a situation where they, in fact, don't have the skills they need to proceed. So there may be way markers, but criteria for the ability to move on your own is seen through evidence of your being able to take independent action. So rather than go to a supervisor, teacher, faculty member all the time asking for what do I do now, you actually go figure out what is done in these situations, proceed, and then begin to take action and check it out. Ability to recoup action after a setback. So a person is seen as independent when they can take harsh criticism and then bounce back. Also goes hand in hand with perceptions of your contributions. Now, this is the interesting part about context. Two researchers said that part-timers are naturally more independent than full-time students because they have a lot more going on and they just do stuff. And online students are also more naturally independent and demanding of their professors. So context in terms of independence and the ability for independent action sometimes is literally your physical context and how far you are from your campus. When do you know you have independence? Well, it's personal voice. It's the best and truest sense of independence in an academic setting. And two researchers discussed independence in terms of personal voice. One, Gonzalez linked ethnic and racial divide in higher education to difficulties with claiming their voice in their doctoral seminars with professors and in their writing, making the statement that racially and ethnically diverse people, and for that matter, people come from different foreign cultures, have, because of their context, a decidedly different voice, and yet the kind of bulldozing, we're all going to do it one way aspect that many find to be true in education in any setting may just roll right over that and make it difficult for these people to claim their voice in their work. So you know you have it when you can claim it, when you feel good about it, when you can discuss and bring to light the particular aspects of your individual context. Another author, Gordon, in Flexible Pedagogies, it says that the encouragement of personal voice and neutral self-evaluation allow for a greater sense of independence on the one hand, and then support when you need it on the other. So if you are encouraged to have your own personal voice with a neutral evaluation coming at you, just encouragement, then you're more likely to feel supported as well. And Adrian asks, isn't personal voice acquired through engaging in critical thinking and writing and analysis? But yes, those hours that we spend by ourselves sorting and resorting ideas so that something fresh develops out of them is a first step. And then how to put it down so it consistently shows through as your voice. So your voice is in written form different from other people's. And some of the previous slide, or no, some of the top part of this slide has to do with that. I've read some theses and dissertations, particularly from Latino authors, that where the cultural context of the voice was really clear, and that added something quite special to their work. And I certainly couldn't have been able to write those things because it wasn't my context. So it was not only the ideas that carried me through their thesis, but it was their approach to the ideas. Does that make sense? And all of that is part of critical thinking. If we take critical thinking to include reflexive, F-L-E-X-I-V-E thinking, where we reflect, CT, on our own, kind of the effect of our personhood on the circumstance. So for those of you not familiar with reflexive and reflective, reflective is when we think about things in a critical viewpoint, and reflexive is when we think about our impact on the things we are thinking about. And all of that really deep self inner thought adds up to personal voice, and it definitely develops with time and experience. Is synthesis one way of demonstrating one's personal voice? Not so much if it is just synthesis. But if it's synthesis done in such a way as to birth new perspectives, then yes, I would say I see it. And this is a personal observation. Others might disagree with me, and I'd have to go to the literature to see if they did. But my personal view is that synthesis is more like the ground we plant our voice in, and our voice would be more like the plants, the new growth that comes out of that work. That's, I guess, an Alana view. So I thought about these things that these other authors had said, and I decided that maybe there is some portion here of something that I talk about quite a bit when we go into personal voice, which is this role definition. I know students who hold themselves in the student role. And even though they make it all the way through a final dissertation or thesis, all the way to Viva, at some point they are still in the what am I supposed to do guidance. And it may be, Adrian sees it as the Maslow's hierarchy of needs again. It may be that, you're right, it is a move towards self-actualization. But in this case, there is this, how much support goes with it, too. So the student role really looks at outside for support, for guidance, for rules. The mentored support, which is you do the best you can, you find your own models, you go forward, you work critically through synthesis and into ideas that you test as much as you are able to test them, and then you go ask for feedback. And that feedback leads you into maybe new ideas and new patterns. And then by the time you are defending, you want to be at independent level, defensible voice. So then there's this question, isn't there, within this about what steps to take or not take. So when I was working with students from Greece, who were then transplanted to the UK, they were expressing that their early work in higher education was sit down, copy it out, take a test, and make sure you say just exactly what the book said. No independent thought. Then they got to the UK, and they were thrown into confusion because their student role was one that required some independence, and they didn't know what to do. So then you move into mentored support, and then you have this within mentored support. It can get a little dicey about when are you independent and when are you too independent, and it's going to cost you some time because you went the wrong direction. So that's the steps to take and not take. Let's see. Adrian says that the mentored support would provide love, security, and self-esteem, confidence too. Oh man, Adrian, that's beautiful. That is the ideal. Let me just go back and look at this and say to students who may or may not have the chat with them, mentored support would provide love, security, and self-esteem, confidence as well. Would build confidence, can't provide confidence, but it can build confidence because it provides love, security, and self-esteem. I think that is a lovely view of what everyone needs when they are in a transition place, moving from one level of any hierarchy to another. And the lowest level would be subject matter, knowledge, expertise, academic writing skills, etc. But also, Adrian, in the lowest level is the challenge with ambiguity that we discussed in the first one of these 5. And context is so much the determinant of what we find ambiguous. So if we've done any of these things before, we're on more comfortable ground. If it's our culture, we're on more comfortable ground. If we feel secure inside, all of those things. And if we're not, then any lack of knowledge, expertise, or skills throws us into a spin. So what do we do? Well, for one thing, let's look at these two concepts together, variety and courage. And it comes from the idea that only a fool does the same thing to get a different result. So you have, as graduate students, previous educational experience. But now the requirement is to move up that curve towards independence. And that's going to cause you to do some different things and to create some places where you're going to need courage. Variety has been said to be the spice of life, and it may prove to be the spice of engagement. That comes from the Finnish study that I mentioned. And so that says if you are interested in this concept of independence and your inner being suggests that perhaps it's one you need to grow, then start doing different things. Go to group meetings of people in your field outside of your university. Go to conferences and sit in on the research that may impinge on what you're doing and some that may not. Take risks. Be in groups you wouldn't have been before, and work your way into them, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in another minute. Anecdotal evidence regarding cohorts and communities demonstrates a bell curve where some will never engage and some will engage and stay engaged for years, but most are in the curve of coming in, slowly engaging, and then moving on. Classify engagement is those students who are, and then this particular group classified students as project manager, wanderer, or hobbyist. So people who got in there, got their thesis done, that was it, boom, boom, boom. People who wandered from one portion to another, or people they weren't sure were ever going to finish their thesis because they were approaching it more like a hobbyist. All right, so then independence requires action and taking risks. So, of course, we can't expect, anytime risk comes in, we don't expect an easy process. These researchers found that most fall somewhere in the middle of both engagement and the likelihood of moving on. Moreover, people may report feelings of engagement when they merely lurk at the edge of conversation. So everyone who's watching this should ask themselves, do I think I'm part of the group when in fact all I'm doing is watching? And that may explain why so many people join social network groups in the tools like LinkedIn, but very few of them post. And Adrienne says that she had a conversation with her advisor about how she planned to unpack her theoretical construct empirically during advisor. Does that count as independence? Yes, it does. You developed it, had an idea about it, were confident enough, if I'm right, you have to say yes, were confident enough that this would work, and then brought it into her as a, what do you think? Is that the kind of conversation? If so, then give yourself points for independence in that regard. Now, there's some risks here with independence. Provocative, but the goal is that our writing, our voice, etc., is provocative, but it is steady and it has clear roots. So we want to avoid plagiarism, of course. And plagiarism is any time we're tossing around ideas and statements like they're ours, but they're not, without or giving incorrect citations and references. We all know that. But the deeper level of plagiarism, and one that I had a dean of graduate studies tell me he was much more concerned with, was the idea of plagiarism, where he wouldn't be so concerned about somebody actually, like he wasn't going to hire Turnitin for his university, because he wasn't so concerned that a student was literally cutting and pasting in graduate school, but that his ideas that he had spent years developing weren't even credited when other people who had obviously read his work were using them. So be really clear on the stream of where you get your ideas as much as you can. In other words, have independent thoughts, state them with firm clarity, but back them up by citing them. So then I was thinking again about this exercise. And so what do we do to exercise independence? And I'm thinking that it has to do with what we are not innately comfortable with. So thinking about the doctoral students that I know, I would say the next time you want to say something, say it. The next time you want to do something, do it. Or if it's your norm to say and do what you were propelled to, then the next time you're propelled to do something, think about it, kind of tease out for a minute its unintended consequences, and then decide if you're going to do it or not do it. So it has to do with our consciousness in the moment, not just for what we're propelled to do, but what will benefit the entire situation. That's a truly independent action. One that is considered, one that has intent, and one that is, in an academic sense, appropriate for the field that you're in and the train of thoughts that you work with, etc. So that leads me to the end of our conversation. Adrienne, what do you think? Are there interesting ideas in this that I should be teasing out? What do you think is going to be the key points for students here? And for those of you that are watching by recording, thank you for doing so, and tease out for yourself, how independent do you feel? Do you want more? Are you like the online student who actually wants less, or whatever? So I think it's a subtle conversation, perhaps one that'll develop here over time. A few prerequisites for becoming independent. Yes. That's kind of where I was trying to go. Higher order thinking skills. Yes. A growth mindset. Yes. Flexibility connections within conceptual and empirical. Knowing that you can grow. Excellent. Proactive, both in attitudes and in action. Yes. Having it's like social skills. You develop a sense of when you've gone too far, when you need to push a little harder, and independence takes just that little extra bit beyond your comfort zone. Because then it moves, see if you agree with this, then it moves from independence into leadership. If we take these and we develop these as a skill set, and we stay on track reflectively and reflexively, then we're developing the basic skills of leadership. Do you agree? Never cease to sharpen our tools of the trade. Yep. But those tools sharpening comes with, there's something about that one that provokes me to say it has to do with doing different things. Variety. Because I see some academics, we've all seen them, where sharpening became dulling through repetition. So there's some component of that says, let's hone to the variety and the courage. Let's step out a little bit past our comfort zone. And when we do, and we learn from that level of discomfort, everything gets stronger. Be confident about responding to the challenges from questions from peers and the rest of the academic community. And if you're not confident, pretend to be confident until you have mastered it. Nothing displays or nothing does worse things for a challenging situation than for the lack of confidence in the person challenged to become so self-apparent it's painful to others. So, fake it till you make it. Okay, so a few things up at Doctoral Net. If for people who haven't taken the survey on the socialization experiences, it's linked here. And I will put these slides up in the big marker room as well. There's a full range of webinars and writing groups, but a couple of notes. On the 15th, Dr. Kat Malinsky is going to talk about what's involved in academic coaching, in case you've ever wondered. Maria is back with us for 4 times, 2 on critical thinking with an exercise in the middle, and 2 on critical analysis with an exercise in the middle. Starts in February, runs through March. And Dr. Joanne Preston, who is a multi-year editor, is going to have the same before exercise after event for how to get published. And we've developed a new 30-day challenge on improving your work-life balance, where you do just a little bit every day from a list. And that's a faking it till you make it. Would it be possible to offer lower group cost coaching sessions of 3 to 4 people? You know, yes, it is possible. The challenge we've had with that in the past is that we had, both Maria and I have tried that, and Maria is the one to really ask about that. But the trouble is getting the others that will go with you. So it might be that you'd want to talk to the linguist group about it or the writing group about it, because she is certainly willing. But what happened was only one person would come, or so many people would come, or it was financially too difficult for the coach for the amount of goodness that students got. But that's only one experience, and in fairness, that was a couple of years ago. I'm going to stop the recording now, Adrian. You don't have to go away. But thank you all for watching by recording, and I hope this jogged some interesting ideas. Okay.